3, 2, 1. Hey friends, Janky here, and welcome to another episode of Janky's Lab. Today I got a great game for you. We are playing Mages of Mystralia. Thank God I pronounced that correctly on the first try. It is developed and published by Borealys Games. It goes a little something like this. In a world of magic, your mind is your greatest weapon. Learn the ways of magic and design your own spells to fight enemies, navigate treacherous terrain, and right past wrongs in the kingdom of Mystralia. I am super excited to be sharing this game with you guys today, but before we get started, there is something I wanted to do. A friend of mine, Joe, you've seen him around on the channel, pointed out to me that I haven't been including experimental bias in the past couple Janky's labs, and it is still important for me to have that experimental bias in there, even if I change the setup, because that's going to affect how I review a game. So, changing things up a little, I am bringing out experimental bias before I even start my review, so you guys can go into it knowing what my personal biases are. So, bringing out that experimental bias board, let me tell you what I got. First of all, I was a Kickstarter backer for this game because it looked amazing. Actually, whenever I was at PAX East, I saw this game there and I sat down and I played it. It was one of the days when I didn't have very many appointments, so I was just wandering around and I saw this game, and I'm so glad I picked it up because I had such a great time with it. It was such a cool concept for a game, and I decided to back it on Kickstarter. So I was actually part of the closed beta for it, and I also received a key because I was a Kickstarter backer. So that's definitely going to color my opinion of the game because I was already super into this game before I even got the chance to talk about it with you guys. And that's my experimental bias. That's what I have to admit for this game. I was a Kickstarter backer, I saw it at PAX East, I was part of the closed beta, I got some investment in this game. But it is all because this is a super cool game and I'm very excited to be sharing it with you. So I'm going to fade away and let the review commence, but I really hope you guys enjoy it because I think it's a really cool game. Alright friends, I got my tea with me, I got all my notes here, so let's commence with the review. I know this video is a long one, by the way. I'm sorry, I know it's lengthy, but to be fair, I had 4 hours worth of recorded footage to sort through, so comparatively, this video is pretty short compared to the source material. Anyway, let's get started talking about Borealys Games' Mages of Mystralia. Every time I pronounce that correctly, I'm so happy with myself. Anyway, like I said, I saw this game at PAX East. I was very excited about it. I was so glad I decided to pick it up. It was so cool as a concept. It's great. You are playing as mage in training, Zia. The story actually starts with you burning down your uncle's house and killing your uncle. It's pretty sad, not to give things away, but I just think it's interesting because generally this game is pretty colorful and cartoony in its style, so the fact that it tends to have a pretty dark story attached to it, I find an interesting juxtaposition. Anyway, I'm just playing through the beginning right here. This is where we meet our spellbook, who will teach us all the spells we need to know to get through the game. I suspect he has some sort of hidden agenda. Or she? It? I don't know. The spellbook talks to us, and it says some pretty sketchy things sometimes, so I'm concerned about what its ulterior motives are. Anyway, let me get right into the spellcasting system because that's what's so awesome about this game, and we're learning the first spell right now. So, this game is all about having 4 basic spells that we can modify later through the use of runes. This first spell we just learned, Immedi, can be used for melee attacks, as you can see there. It's also useful for hitting switches, and later on we use it for some explosive results. This next basic spell is called Ego. We use it mostly for shields in this section. But again, like I said, these spells can be modified, and you'll see some modifications of this one later. This one I think is really cool because its modifications are actually pretty useful and pretty varying as we move through. So other things that this particular spell can do in addition to the shielding is it can also create a dash for us, so we can dash out of the way of enemies, which is very useful later in the game. And much later, there's going to be a clip here that's going to show another use for it, which is making copies. But we'll talk about that whenever we get to the puzzle solving section. Anyway, I just wanted to show this off. it's one of my fave spells. This next one is called Actus. Basically, it's used to create mines or projectiles. At the beginning of the game, you use it to create what could loosely be termed mines, which are just fireballs that stay in place. Later, I create projectiles with it, and I've never switched back to mines because projectiles are so much better and easier. This last spell is called Creo. Basically, it lets you create things like these ice flow bridges here. Later on, you can create other things with it too. I'll leave that for those times when that happens. But mostly it's used to get around places and you activate faraway switches and things like that. So those are your 4 basic spells that you start with, and then like I said, later they can be modified with runes. So this first rune that I'm showing you guys here is called a behavior rune. They're the first step in modifying your spells. So behavior runes change certain behaviors. In this case, I'm equipping one called Move, which allows me to create projectiles with Actus. It also allows you to create chaining ice flows with Creo, which is very helpful for making ice bridges and things. So you'll see that what was once a stagnant fireball becomes a projectile fireball. You'll also notice that grid that you'll see again here in a minute whenever I show you this rune. That will also affect how you construct your spells because you can only fit runes in certain ways around your spell. Basically, arrows have to be facing each other along one of the lines in order for you to actually make the rune work. So this next one that I was showing you is an augment rune. Basically, it changes one of the behaviors. So in this case, the augment rune I put on was move to the right, and I put that on the move spell. So whenever I fire it, it moves to the right. I actually played around with this a bit. If you attach it directly to the spell itself, it will cast immediately to the right out of your wand. So depending on where you place the augment runes can actually really affect what they can do. So it's interesting because you can build the spell in different ways depending on what you need it to do. Yeah, so I just think that that's interesting. And it's helpful in some situations, particularly puzzle solving, things like that. That rune that I just got there is Ignition. So this I just wanted to show you guys mostly because I wanted to point out a cool thing with runes, which is there are tons, as you can see in this book here. The really important ones, like this one that I just got called Ignition, which creates explosions, those are usually pretty obvious where they are. They're usually directly in your path somewhere. So in this case, Ignition is required to get through this particular dungeon that I'm in right now. And it's also required to get through some later areas in the game. So what you can do here is find it right in your path. It's directly in your path, so it's easy to find. And then later, you can do extra challenges to find some of the other runes that you might not necessarily need, but you can use to great effect depending on how you like to solve puzzles and what your style is and all that. Also, I just wanted to show off a bit of combat because I didn't edit a lot of combat in, so I just wanted to show a little bit of that. This last rune here is the trigger type rune. So trigger type runes can create spells on top of spells. So whenever you add a trigger rune to a spell, it means that once the trigger is activated, in whatever way the trigger is activated, it creates a new spell that you can fire off. So what I create here is what I rename as the Fiery Boom spell. Basically, it's a projectile fireball. Then I attach the trigger rune to it, which allows me to cast another spell as soon as that one hits on impact. So the one that I cast is the explosion spell. And so whenever I use a fireball at the end of it, it will trigger an explosion, which will set off that switch that I'm trying to hit in the game. I just think it's really interesting the way that they construct the spells. It's the thing that I want to talk about first, not only because I edited it in first, but because it's the main feature of this game. So this game is all about these spells and how you basically program them. It's basically programming, and we call it magic, and it's awesome, and I love this feature of the game. You can combine them in all sorts of different ways, doing all sorts of different things. Oh, I want to show you this real quick too. Around the world, you can find wands that can help you cast certain spells. So in this case, it's the Igni wand, which helps you cast fire spells. I later get an aura wand by redefeating a boss. And then this dude you meet later in the game. So these are characters that kind of come in toward the back half of the game. They're called the sages, and they give you what's called essences. So the essences basically tell you what element your spell is. And you can change the elements of the different spells to create different effects. So like I was saying to you guys earlier, you can turn the Ice Bridge spell, Creo, into a tornado producing spell if you just change it to air. And it's so awesome how you can just recombine these spells in so many different ways. And the really nice thing about this game is that you can list these spells and name them however you want. And then there's a quick access mode. So if you're in the middle of battle or you're trying to solve a puzzle and you want to try a couple different things, you can actually hit the left bumper and press the spell button, whatever the trigger for the spell is, and you can cycle through your spells. And you can save different kinds of essences, you can save different builds, you can save different programs, you can save triggers, all sorts of things. But you can only save 6 at a time. But that's pretty much all you're going to need, because if you can't do it in 6, then that's a problem. But no, it was the thing that really drew me to this game. It was so amazing. Now, I will say the one thing about casting spells is your mana bar, which is that blue bar you see at the top of the screen. That's one of the other things I really like about this game is the UI. It's very simple and easy to read. Basically, you have your health bar and your mana bar, and that's all you have to worry about, which is awesome. Love that. Love simple UIs. Anyway, the more augments that you add to a particular spell, the more mana it will cost to cast it. So yeah, you could create a fire projectile bomb that triggers into another fire projectile bomb that triggers like an explosion, that triggers this, that triggers that. You could create a massive spell that does a billion things at once, but it's going to cost you your entire mana bar to shoot it. So you get one chance and that's all you got. So it's really interesting. You can create these really cool spells and they can be useful for different things, but you also have to be aware of what you're creating and how much mana it's going to cost, and consider if you could do this a simpler way. Or you could just go whole hog and build an absolutely ridiculous spell, which I did try once, unfortunately off of recording, but it was pretty great. Oh, so this is what I wanted to show you with the ego spell. So this was something that came in one of the later dungeons. It's called Duplicate. So for projectiles, all it does is creates multiple projectiles. But whenever you use it with the ego, you can create stone statues. So this is another great example of adding an augmentation rune that will actually change what exactly the spell does. All the rest of the stuff that I'm trying to show you here is just the puzzles in this game, which is a huge part of the gameplay. So as you go along throughout the dungeons, you'll find tons of puzzles. I kind of liken it to Zelda Wind Waker. Well, actually really any Zelda game because they're filled with puzzles. But it particularly reminds me of Wind Waker just because of the general style of the game. As you solve these puzzles, you'll get these things called purple soul beads, which you can trade in later for extra health and mana at the Mage Haven. Additionally, you can find spell runes. So as I was saying to you guys earlier, there are some runes that you don't necessarily need, but might be nice to have in certain situations, and you have to solve puzzles like these in order to find them. Well, not this one specifically. I'm working toward a beat here too. But they're really cool, and you can collect them through completing these challenges that are sort of hidden around the world. A lot of the times, they'll be behind these plates that you'll sort of see on the ground. Basically, you just have to be on the lookout for them. I absolutely love it because I love games with hidden collector items and stuff. So anytime there's like extra puzzles to do or anything like that in an RPG, I am totally into that. I absolutely love that sort of stuff. So I was really happy to see it in this game. Another type of puzzle that you might see later in the game are these types, which are basically your typical figure out how this thing goes together by rearranging everything kind of puzzle. So these come up often. They're basically called magic seals. They hide mostly soul beads. I don't think I've ever actually come across a situation like this where you get a rune from it, But the soul beads are helpful, like I said, because you can get upgrades later in the game, which is cool. So I think I've talked quite a bit about puzzle solving and spells, which admittedly is the main feature of this game, so I definitely wanted to chat about it. But I do think I should take some time to maybe talk about some other features of this game as well. So as you might notice from these clips that I've edited together here, the camera tends to be pretty focused in one specific direction. You don't really get a lot of movement out of it, which is one of the things that I was kind of sad about in this game. Most of the time, it's fine. I think they did a pretty good job of working with a fixed camera and always letting you see what you need to see. There are just a few situations where I kind of wish you could move the camera around, because there are certain puzzles where it might be easier to see everything you're trying to work with if you can maybe move the camera around. Like, there was one situation that I came across later in the game where there were a whole bunch of torches spread out in a row, and I kind of wish I could see all the torches at once to sort of help me figure out how to solve the puzzle, and I couldn't change the camera angle. The other thing, which is much more common that you run into, is whenever you come up against mobs, like goblin mobs, you tend to have spear throwers in there. This is also true of the human guards that you sometimes encounter, which throw nets at you that you get tangled up in, and it sucks. The problem with that is that sometimes whenever you're working with a fixed camera angle, you don't see the goblin thrower, so all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a spear just comes flying off the side of the screen, and you have no way of saving yourself from it unless you have a really itchy trigger finger. So sometimes I kind of wish that in mob situations and battle situations I had maybe a little bit more camera control. The other thing too about the mobs is that it can be really hard to switch between things. And what I mean by that is, even though you have this quick trigger, the game is still going on in the background as you're flying through your spells. So if you want to switch to, say, shield from dash, okay, that's fine, because the way that I have my spells set up is that I immediately go from shield into dash, which is fine. But if I want to switch back into shield, I have to cycle through 5 real fast to get back to shield. And that's fine, but I also have to be like dodging everything going on while that happens. Now, that's not so much a big issue as is when I run out of mana. So I did find a lot of situations in mobs where I would run out of magic energy, and so I would basically be left defenseless. I never died in this situation, so it was never really a huge problem for me, but I could see it being one of those things that people get annoyed by. Particularly gamers who like to mash buttons, because if you like to mash buttons, this game definitely punishes you for doing that. The other thing is, in later stages of the game, you come into mobs where certain goblins are only susceptible to certain things, and they can defend against most other kinds of magic. This is particularly unsettling whenever you come across mobs that are made of multiple different types of goblins and you have to continuously switch spells to defeat them. Again, it wasn't a huge thing for me. I didn't have a ton of trouble. I never died, but it's definitely something that I could see maybe some people getting annoyed about if they had to come up against that and they really liked mashing buttons and they really hated running out of magic. Now, what I can say in this game's favor is that there is a way to quick recharge your magic through mana charms, which you get from the Mage's Haven. Basically, you make them out of flowers and the currency in the game, which is soul beads. Not the purple soul beads that you saw, but green soul beads, which you can collect from enemies and pots and pretty much anywhere in the game. The one issue with that is you have to have them, and if you're like me and you're out adventuring and you're caught up in the story, you don't always go back to get more of them. So that's definitely something that you're going to have to watch for if you play this game, because there will be situations in which you will run out of mana and you will be sad. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the story itself. So Mages of Mystralia, as I said, follow Zia here in her journey to sort of save the valley from darkness, but also fight this anti-magic ruling class that's in Mystralia right now, and also deal with all of these people who are doing all sorts of crazy things. So there's like an evil chancellor, but there's also this darkness, and there's this mad mage king that they talk about. The only problem that I have with the story, which I think is a good story at its base, is that it's told so fast pace. So I don't have a lot of story edited into this review footage here, but all I can say is that everything happens very quickly. So basically, right after you learn the spells, you get to Mage's Haven. After you get to Mage's Haven, they send you off on a mission to defeat a creature in the woods. Then after that happens, you learn immediately that you have to go off to this ancient mage temple, and you hear about this mad king, and you're just like, what's going on? And then you go to the mage's temple, and then you defeat a sky lizard, and then you go back, and they're like, a village is being burned down, your village, by this evil chancellor dude. And then it turns out that this one dude who you think is kind of important to the story, but you never see him, suddenly he's dead because the chancellor... I don't want to give away the entire story here, but it's kind of crazy. Oh, this is what I was talking about. So you can feed the purple mana beads to the wells outside of Mage's Haven, and they'll give you health and mana upgrades, which is nice. So for no other reason, if for any other reason, you should go back to Mage's Village just to get that. Okay, so I know I've talked about a lot in this review, especially a lot about the spellcasting system and the runes and all of that. And I talked some about the story and the camera and all of that, but I haven't shown you guys a lot of battle. So, to make up for that, I am finishing out this review with a ranking of my favorite boss battles that I recorded in the game. Starting with my least favorite boss battle, ending with the boss battle that I loved the most. Starting out with, of course, the blob royals. No offense to them, it's just that whenever I come across blob monsters in games, I just don't care for them. They divide and they turn into more little versions of themselves. I don't like it. Also, this battle is an excellent example of me losing all my mana by casting spells in a boss battle, or any battle for that matter. I run out of magic so quickly because I just shoot nothing but fireballs. This one actually kind of has the same problem. Mage Queen Irina, I run out of magic here too because I'm shooting crazy duplicate fireballs and it's way too much. Anyway, let me wrap up my final thoughts on mages in Mystralia, shall I? So, like I told you guys, yeah, there's some issues with the pacing of the story. Yeah, occasionally there's some minor issues with the camera. Yeah, you can run into really frustrating mobs of enemies that you have to deal with, and it's annoying and all of that stuff. But with all of that in mind, I will say, I think that Borealys Games set out to do one thing really well with Mages in Mystralia, which is the spellcasting and crafting system. I think that they wanted to make it possible for gamers to be able to really program their experience and play the game the way they want to play the game by making the spells that they want to make. And you know what? I think they managed to accomplish that. At no point in this game did I ever feel like the spellcasting system was an issue. Even in the most ridiculous spell situations. I remember after I finished recording, I actually built a spell that had like 5 triggers on it and was the most ridiculous spell on the face of the earth. I was sure it would just break the game. Didn't. I ran out of magic, but it did break the game. I didn't have frame rate issues. I didn't have graphical issues. None of that. And so, with that in mind, let's get out Janky's experimental scale, shall we? So, as you guys remember, we have 5 possible rankings. We have smashing success, promising results, more trials needed, revisions required, and acid kid. And because this game, I think, really did what it set out to do, which was that awesome spellcasting system, I'm going to give it a smashing success. I hope you guys agree. If you don't, that's fine. You can, of course, leave it in the comments down below. But for now, I'm going to consider this experiment concluded with my favorite boss battle, Sleet, the Ancient Ice Lizard. So, I hope you guys enjoyed yet another episode of Janky's Lab. If you did, you can leave that like down below. Comments, positive or negative, as I said, feel free to leave those below as well. But more than anything, I hope you have a lovely day, evening, or whatever you happen to be watching. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next time, this is Janky Shenanigans, signing out.